Coming up on our newscast tonight. At the 33rd ASEAN Summit meeting, President Moon Jae-in introduced his vision to forge stronger economic ties with the Southeast Asian bloc. He also announced plans to hold a Korea-ASEAN Summit with North Korea joining in as well. Korea's Securities and Futures Commission rules Samsung BioLogics intentionally violated accounting rules in 2014, a decision that could lead to the delisting of the biopharmaceutical firm. At a science technology-related ministers' meeting held the first time in over a decade, the nation's prime minister emphasizes that Korea must be ready for broad shifts stemming from the Fourth Industrial Revolution. He also underscores the importance of integrating conventional state affairs with science technology through R&D. NEWSCENTER begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Welcome to our program. I'm Daniel Che. We'll start things off from Singapore, where President Moon Jae-in attended the 33rd ASEAN Summit meeting. The South Korean leader shared his plans to boost ties with member nations in the next 30 years, including hosting a special Korea-ASEAN Summit, even hinting at the possibility of North Korea taking part in as well. Shin Se-min has our top story.
President Moon Jae-in says he will actively review the possibility of including North Korea's Kim Jong-un in a special Korea-ASEAN Summit to be held next year in South Korea. The idea of inviting Kim was proposed by the leader of one of the ASEAN member nations.
Indonesian President Joko Widodo proposed that North Korea's Kim Jong-un be invited to special Korea-ASEAN Summit next year, saying that the summit would be all the more significant with the leaders of both Koreas in attendance.
And that, President Moon said, was a, quote, noteworthy suggestion. He said Seoul will closely consult with ASEAN member nations in advance of what would be the third special ASEAN Summit to be held in South Korea. In Wednesday's summit with the ASEAN member nations in Singapore, the president pitched his plans to boost cooperation, seen as the basis of his new southern policy, which include the special Korea-ASEAN Summit next year in Korea and setting up a Korea-Mekong Summit. Overall, President Moon's policy calls for tighter economic ties between South Korea and the 10 ASEAN nations, a policy that has already produced tangible results in terms of trade volume and people-to-people exchanges.
한 아세안의 관계가 한 차원 더 높아질 것입니다. 아세안의 하나된 힘으로 아시아의 평화와 번영이 앞당겨지길 희망합니다.
On the sidelines, President Moon has also discussed ways to boost both economic and diplomatic cooperation with Russia as the regional players move forward in the pursuit of peace. Ahead on President Moon's schedule here in the city-state of Singapore is a meeting with U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, in which the two leaders are likely to discuss ways to make more progress on North Korea-related diplomacy, especially now with the relations between Pyongyang and Washington seeming to falter. Shin Se-min, Arirang News, Singapore.
Delegations from the two Koreas are meeting on Friday at the Joint Liaison Office north of the border to discuss possible cooperation in the aviation sector. Seoul's Unification Ministry said last week that Pyongyang suggested the meeting and Seoul accepted it. The South's delegation will be led by a senior official from the Transport Ministry and the North's by the Deputy Director General of the regime's Aviation Administration. According to the Unification Ministry, discussions will center around whether there will be any areas the two sides could work together on within the framework of international sanctions. Meanwhile, almost 100 South Korean business people begin a 4-day visit to Pyongyang tomorrow. Their trip is to attend an event held there for Koreans involved in overseas businesses. A 5-member high-level delegation from Pyongyang is in South Korea for a 4-day visit. They're members of the North Korea-Asia-Pacific Peace Committee, coming primarily to attend an international conference on Friday. The event is hosted by a South Korean organization and Gyeonggi-do Province. Participants from the two Koreas and Japan will be discussing the forced mobilization of Koreans during Japan's colonial rule. The delegation drew attention because It initially included 2 senior North Korean officials who've been involved in Pyongyang-Washington negotiations and inter-Korean discussions. But the North confirmed one of them will not be traveling south. According to Seoul's Unification Ministry, there are no plans to meet with the North Korean delegation as their visit is of a civic nature. U.S. President Donald Trump claims he is not surprised by the recent CSIS report on North Korea's secretive missile bases, even insisting there was nothing new in the findings. America's top security advisor echoed those remarks, adding his boss is ready for a second summit with the regime's leader. Kim Yo-sun shares with us their remarks.
President Trump's response was short and to the point. He said there is nothing new in the report published this week by the Washington-based think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He took to Twitter to say he's fully aware of the missile base that is referred to in the report, stressing nothing out of the ordinary is happening. Trump also criticized a New York Times article which cited the report as fake news as it spread incorrect information. U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton also confirmed there was nothing new in the CSIS report. He also said President Trump is ready for a second summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Such a swift response shows Washington's willingness to show Pyongyang that its stance is unchanged and it's still open to denuclearization talks. There has been criticism of the way the CSIS report was portrayed in the media, especially by the New York Times, that called the findings, quote, great deception by the North. The report is also based on satellite images taken in March, which was 3 months before the first ever summit between the leaders of North Korea and the U.S. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
38 North criticized a story that's based on the CSIS report. The New York Times article read, "The North has been engaged in a great deception." The U.S. website monitoring the regime called the story a disservice to readers, that it is misleading as Pyongyang never promised to inhibit the deployment of its missiles, let alone dismantle the bases. 38 North also pointed out that Washington didn't offer any corresponding steps to make the deal possible and emphasized the importance of focusing on negotiations rather than making premature accusations on the reclusive state. South Korea's top intel agency revealed their stance on the recent Center for Strategic and International Studies report on North Korea's undeclared missile sites. The NIS was aware of such conditions and suspects the regime has been continuing nuclear and missile activities even after the Singapore summit. For details, let's turn to our Kim Mo-kyun.
The National Intelligence Service said that it was already aware of the current activities of North Korea's Sagamol missile base amid allegations by a CSIS report that it is one of the North's hidden, undeclared missile sites. Addressing reporters after a closed-door meeting with officials from the spy agency, lawmakers of the Parliament's Intelligence Committee said that the NIS was aware of the North's possession of such missile sites and that activities in the sites are not out of the ordinary. Lawmakers were also briefed by the NIS on the situation of the North's current stockpiles, which include Rodong and Scud missiles, and on its assumption that North Korea is continuing with its nuclear and missile-related activities even after the Pyongyang-Washington Summit in June. The NIS said that they're presuming that activities like nuclear development and nuclear warhead miniaturization are still going on in the North. The missile base issue was also touched upon at the Defense Committee's review of next year's budget on Wednesday, with the government and the ruling party proving themselves that they were keeping close tabs on North Korea's latest nuclear and missile development programs, while the opposition criticizing them for not disclosing such important details linked with public security. Kim Mo-kyun, Arirang News.
The nation's financial regulator says Samsung BioLogics, a pharmaceutical arm of Samsung Group, breached accounting standards. As a result, trading of the firm's shares on the benchmark Kospi has been immediately suspended. Also, the company will be subject to punitive examination for delisting. Kim Ji-yeon gets us up to speed with the developments.
Korea's Securities and Futures Commission said Wednesday it found that Samsung BioLogics had intentionally inflated its value by nearly $4 billion in 2015. It says the company had deliberately applied different accounting standards against regulations by changing the way it estimated how much its majority stake in Samsung Bioepis, its partner, was worth.
Samsung has deliberately changed accounting standards back in 2015 to justify its management control. We have concluded that this was done intentionally, violating regulations.
Samsung BioLogics had denied any wrongdoing, saying it reflected different accounting standards in the event its unlisted joint venture Samsung BioEpis exercised its call option. But the financial regulator argued Samsung BioLogics had no legitimate reason to suddenly change the status of Samsung BioEpis from a subsidiary company into an affiliated company, allowing Samsung BioLogics to customize its books to 18 times of its partner's initial value. The move is also suspected of committing an accounting fraud in the merger process of Samsung C&T Corporation and ICT Industries in 2015 in favor of Samsung Electronics vice chairman and the group's apparent heir, Lee Jae-yong, the biggest shareholder of Samsung C&T. With this, the financial regulator says it plans to bring a lawsuit against Samsung BioLogics. It has already imposed a fine of more than $7 million and advised the company to dismiss its CEO. Samsung BioLogics said it'll file for an administrative litigation, which could take 7 to 8 years in total to settle the dispute, taking into consideration the motion to appeal is an exercise in lower courts. Meanwhile, the verdict is expected to affect some 80,000 minority shareholders. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea continues its push for innovative growth in science and technology, especially in the field of R&D. A meeting of related ministers took place for the first time in 11 years to further tackle the issues at hand. Cha Sang-mi has the highlights from that session.
The South Korean government's innovation meeting that has been on hold over a decade has been restored.
Today, we begin the science and technology-related ministers' meeting for the first time in 11 years. This meeting went on for 3 years from 2004, but was halted due to change in administration.
Citing how the country's potential growth rate has edged down to 2.9% from above 3%, Prime Minister Lee Na-kyun during the meeting on Wednesday called on the ministers to prepare for the broad shifts stemming from the Fourth Industrial Revolution.
We need to raise creativity and dynamism in the economy, society, and culture through innovations in policies and processes. It is high time for the integration of conventional state affairs with science and technology through R&D.
The PM said for the first time in the nation's history, nearly $18 billion of the government's annual budget has been allocated to the R&D sector. But he also pointed out the sector's lackluster performance due to the lack of human resources and marginal efficiency. The Minister of Science and ICT and 15 other ministers discussed the direction of R&D innovation, as well as medium and long-term plans for dementia research, a huge issue since over 14% of Korea's population is over 65 years old. The ministers also discussed fostering the talent required for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, namely in artificial intelligence and data analysis. The restoration of the Technology Innovation meeting comes after President Moon Jae-in ordered increased innovation in research and development. The Prime Minister will chair the meeting every month. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
Seoul's ICT exports hit their second highest monthly record in October, continuing their boom from September. The welcome trend is driven mainly by robust shipments of semiconductors. Kan Young-woo help us dissect the digits.
A report released by the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Wednesday shows South Korea's ICT exports rose by more than 12% on year in October to more than $20.2 billion. The third straight month it has surpassed the $20 billion mark. The nation's ICT trade surplus surpassed the $10 billion mark for the third straight month, with a surplus of nearly $10.2 billion in October. The lion's share of the country's ICT exports were semiconductors, which climbed by 21.5% on year to $11.7 billion last month. The ministry says it's the first time that over $100 billion of semiconductors had been exported in a single year. Shipments of DRAMs and NAND flash memory chips soared by 37% and 35.5% on year, respectively. Exports of displays rose 10.5% on year to more than $2.4 billion. Smartphone exports also jumped by more than 14% on year last month to more than $1.6 billion. And exports of computers increased by more than 56% on year to $140 million. By region, exports to China surpassed the $10 billion mark for the 6th straight months in October, reaching nearly $10.5 billion, which is an increase of more than 3% from the same month last year. Kanyong-woo, Arirang News.
The government has been feverishly working to improve the employment situation in the nation. Some of the efforts include injecting almost $3.5 billion in extra taxpayer funds to job creation programs. However, the latest monthly report shows the situation for job seekers remains grim. Ko Ryuni provides a closer look.
More disappointing figures on the employment front in South Korea, despite the government's efforts to increase the number of jobs. According to Statistics Korea on Wednesday, the overall unemployment rate was 3.5% in October, up 0.3 percentage points from the same period last year. Just comparing the month of October, it's the highest figure since 2005. The number of unemployed people also hit its highest level for October since 1999, when Korea was still struggling to recover from the 1997 Asian financial crisis. There was a slight glint of light, such as the number of newly added jobs. The number of employed people was up 64,000 on year in October to reach almost 27.1 million. This is a slight increase considering the disappointing figures recorded during the previous months. The agency said the overall situation is looking grim.
Although the number of people employed in the health activities sectors is increasing, the number of people employed in wholesale and retail and business facilities management is continuously decreasing. Also, the overall employment rate has been going down on year since February. The current employment situation is serious.
For the disappointing figures in these specific sectors, an economic expert pointed to the increased minimum wage, which was raised by more than 16% this year.
People working in wholesale and retail are more affected by the minimum wage hike than those in other sectors. The wage hike leads to an increase in costs for employers, meaning that some might need to fire their workers.
The South Korean government unveiled new measures to boost job creation in late October. It includes plans to create 59,000 jobs for youth, people in their 50s and 60s, and the elderly, mainly in central government, public institutions, and local governments. Statistics Korea says the effect of this plan will be reflected in November's data. Ko Ryuni, Arirang News.
The Defense Ministry is currently working on a bill on the alternative service for conscientious objectors of the nation's mandatory military conscription. For now, though, these individuals will have to serve at correction facilities for 36 months. Park Ji-won has the full story.
South Korea's Defense Ministry is closely examining viable alternative options for conscientious objectors who refuse the nation's mandatory military service. According to ministry sources Wednesday, conscientious objectors are highly likely to serve at correction facilities like prisons for 36 months starting 2020. At correction institutions, they could assume responsibilities of culinary affairs and commodity management. The sources said, however, such options are not finally confirmed as of now, and the ministry is still open to other opinions and suggestions by civic groups, objectors themselves, and experts. For instance, objectors could serve at facilities like fire stations or medical care centers for a limited period of time. However, the sources said this particular option is much less likely to be heard of in the future, as the ministry's prior on-site inspections of such facilities, as well as public hearings and seminars, show that it's not feasible nor fair enough to serve as a valid replacement for a mandatory military service. The Defense Ministry is currently working on a bill on the measure that could be used for conscientious objectors, aiming to submit the bill to the National Assembly as early as February next year. Annually, about 500 men in South Korea refuse the nation's mandatory military service for a conscientious reason. The refusal was mostly met with jail time of about 18 months for violating Military Service Act. But early this month, the nation's Supreme Court ruled in favor of conscientious objection to military service for the first time, saying people can legally reject mandatory military service on the grounds of conscience or religions. The Constitutional Court also ruled in June this year that it is unconstitutional that the current Military Service Act does not provide alternative ways to serve for conscientious objectors, and ordered to revise the law by the end of 2019. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Moving on to other stories now. Come tomorrow, almost 600,000 students in the nation will be taking the college entrance exam at 1,190 test sites nationwide. The annual test begins at 8:40 a.m. local time, and to make sure students get to the venues without a hitch, extra transportation will be in service for the test takers. Other commuters will start work an hour later than usual. The country's stock markets will also open and close an hour later. During the exam, traffic will be controlled around test sites, and flights will be put on hold for about half an hour in the afternoon to minimize disturbance. The Education Ministry has inspected facilities in advance and prepared extra vehicles for the students in case of natural disasters. And ahead of that all-important exam, President Moon Jae-in sent a message of encouragement to all test takers via Twitter and Facebook. The South Korean leader, who is in Singapore for multiple summit meetings, said that even though he's in a different country, he will see to it that everyone can take the test safely. The president also acknowledged Korea's parents for supporting their children through years of studying to prepare for this fateful moment. Moon urged all test takers to believe in themselves and the hard work they've put in. From startups to global corporate giants, many are joining in the race to use blockchain technology, a decentralized peer-to-peer system that enables transaction online. For an expert's analysis of the industry and how Korean companies can make use of it, our business correspondent Kim Hye-sung sat down with Alex Tapscott, investor in blockchain startups, co-author of the bestseller Blockchain Revolution, and founder of the Blockchain Research Institute. Let's take a look.
Blockchain, along with AI, Internet of Things, and robotics, is considered one of the core technologies of the fourth industrial revolution. Why is that?
So what blockchain represents is a new evolution of the internet. So for the first time in human history, we have a native digital medium for value that allows individuals, businesses, and other institutions to move and store and manage assets peer-to-peer, in the same way that the internet allowed us to move and store information peer-to-peer. And that obviously represents transformational capability for the economy. If you think about certain industries like financial services, still rely mostly on intermediaries, middlemen like banks, to sit in the middle and establish trust and verify identity and enable the movement of value. And now we have a way to replace that.
The Korean government and business circles are also trying to use blockchain technology in various areas like the voting system, logistics, and retail. Where do you see blockchain become the biggest driving force here in Korea?
Well, I think, financial services. I think that Koreans could reinvent banking and use it as a new platform to access customers outside of Korea and also to broaden the services inside of Korea. Telecommunications. If you look at the manufacturing and industrial sectors, Korea is a huge industrial powerhouse. There are big companies like Samsung, LG, and others. I think that they could revolutionize their supply chains with blockchain.
What are some challenges that blockchain technology needs to overcome so that more companies can use the technology and really create disruptions across sectors?
Well, there are at least 10 different challenges. And there's so many, actually, that we dedicated a whole chapter in the book, Blockchain Revolution, to addressing each of these. I would say the biggest ones today are, number one, is the technology scalable to meet the demands of big companies and institutions? Number two is how incumbents will react. What will existing companies do to stop or to prevent this from growing? And then the third one, of course, is governments and regulations. How do we create new rules or new policies to address the rate of change of innovation?
Any advice on the regulation front for the government?
Well, my only advice is that appreciate that as a government, you have a lot of information, but you may not have all the information. And you have to work with other stakeholders. And they should consider working very closely with industry to create the new regulations. The biggest issue today is whether or not a token is a security, a stock. And I think in some cases that's true, and in other cases it isn't. And figuring out which one is which and how to regulate it is very, very important.
Alex Tapscott, founder of Blockchain Research Institute, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Time to turn to Michelle Bach at the Weather Center for the updates you need. Michelle, we usually get a cold wave at this time of the year, but it looks like Mother Nature is being extra kind for the test takers tomorrow.
That's right, Daniela. It will be fairly comfortable under partly cloudy skies tomorrow, but in the morning, those going to take Korea's college entrance exam should dress warmly. Now, the mercury will jump later on into the day, but it will quickly drop by the time the exam is over. And the fine dust levels are also high tomorrow, especially in the western area, so do wear a mask. And by the way, the test takers are allowed to wear them into their exams. Now, there will be patches of fog and frost in the morning, so be extra careful when driving. Lots of regions will see single-digit readings. The daytime highs will be higher than the seasonal norms tomorrow, and most regions will reach up to 15 degrees or even above. And by next week, Seoul is expected to see some morning lows of 0 degrees. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That's all we have for you in tonight's edition of Arirang News Center. Wherever you may be tuning in from, thanks for staying with us.